Hello, if you're watching this video then we probably made similar New Year's resolutions, and that is to learn a new language in 2022. So this video is aiming to give you a comprehensive yet easily understandable blueprint on how to learn a language in this coming year. We'll start off from the very beginning, and the first tip is to pick a language that you're actually interested in. When people ask about the languages that I've been studying, I often get the question as to why I'm not learning Spanish. It probably stems from the fact that Spanish is such a popular language and can be very, very useful. However, my answer to that is simply that I don't want to. Maybe that's a little bit harsh, but my motivation isn't there currently for Spanish. And I know that if I force myself to learn the language when the motivation isn't there, then it's just not going to work out in the long run. To give you some context about how I chose to learn German, I always had a really strong interest in the Germanic languages and German in particular, and it also helps a lot that I am currently doing my studies in Germany, in Munich. The way I really like to learn is to, first of all, find as many suitable resources as you can, free if possible, in the beginning to work through and get a really good foundation in the language. And then you're going to make similar lists for the intermediate and advanced, and then work through these sort of like a game. So what I mean is you can tick them off as you're going through, treat them as like levels where you have to progress through them sequentially. This really helps build some motivation, acts as a sense of like accomplishment, and also helps you keep track of your progress, which is very important. Okay, speaking of resources, how do you find them? And obviously I can't speak for every single language, but the best place to start that I've found for the languages I've been learning is, of course, YouTube. There are likely very good YouTube courses and playlists for the language that you're learning for the A1 level, and that's just the beginner level. And if you want to learn, say, some Mandarin Chinese, that'll be HSK1. If you want to learn Japanese, it'd be N5. And each language that's outside of Europe has their own sort of grading system for fluency. This will give you like a really pleasant start to the language because it won't be too intensive. You can do it at your own pace, and you can look at the comments to see people's questions and answers and everything as well. Because language learning takes a lot of time, you got to be able to manage your time appropriately. And I won't go into too much detail because I already have done a video similar enough to managing time, and that's up here if you want to watch it. And once you know how long or how much of the language you can study each day, then maybe set some goals for yourself. And I don't mean become fluent goals, because they're never really the best things to start out striving towards. Obviously they can be your goals, but I was more talking about some smaller goals, some more short-term achievable goals. For example, I want to finish the A1 playlist I found on YouTube and do 1 episode a day. Or I want to be able to introduce myself in Mandarin Chinese with good pronunciation. Something that is still difficult but takes time to give you a sense of accomplishment when you complete it. I'm going to be doing another video about motivation in the future because it is one of, or if not the most important thing when it comes to language learning, and it's something that people really struggle with and causes a lot of people to drop their language learning New Year's resolutions in like February. Okay, so number 6 is to... Oh, is this off? Oh, I hope that was... It's been a while. Okay, so number 6 is to not be afraid to invest in yourself. And before I go further, if you really don't want to spend any money learning a language, that is completely fine. You obviously don't have to, I'm not forcing you. But I do think spending money is a way of saving some time. The most important factor here is to choose the correct ways and avenues to spend your money in. And in my opinion, if I can spend a little bit of money to help speed up learning the language, I will do it. So the next tip then to obviously go and talk about is where to spend the money and what to invest in. So there are a few areas that people tend to spend the most money in language learning, and that is apps, services, books, and language classes. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the app that I really like later on, but the next tip is going to be around language classes. And that is just because you might be used to learning languages in a classroom environment does not mean that you have to do it that way. I have progressed so much faster learning languages alone and having way more fun while doing it than I ever did while actually in a language classroom. If you, however, think you will really benefit from a language learning environment, a classroom environment, for language learning with a structured schedule, homework, attendance, then yeah, of course, you can, of course, do that if you wish. I know some people that it's really been beneficial for. However, me personally, I do tend to be on the side of having more fun and exploring the languages yourself rather than being forced to do homework, take tests, and yeah, basically that's me. But you can do you. If perhaps you don't really want to go back into a language classroom but really do like this schedule type of learning, again, the video that I mentioned earlier that I've done previously on the channel, how to make a language learning schedule, can be really important if you group it with steps number 3 and number 5, I think. So you can create your own routine this way, and using the resources that you've laid out for yourself, assign yourself some homework, or give yourself some mini deadlines to go through and like level up in your language learning that I mentioned previously. So number 9 is you can take as long as you want before you are willing to speak in the language. There is absolutely no need to rush. You can take your time, you can let the language soak in, you can get familiarized with the language a little bit more, build up their confidence before you're speaking. It is perfectly fine. It's almost even recommended, I believe, because the more exposure you have to the language, the less likely you are to rely on your native language to directly translate the sentences you're wanting to say in the new one, because that could lead to some bad habits and a stronger accent. Not that I'm saying accents are bad, but this could be a way you could improve and sound more native if you just gave yourself a little bit more time to get used to the language first and let your brain get accustomed to the patterns, etc. Speaking of getting adjusted to the language and becoming familiarized with it, I'm grouping the next 2 tips together, and that is to read as much as possible and to listen as much as possible. I'm grouping these because these are the so-called inputs in language learning. It's really what allows you to soak the language in, and I will be doing, and I think I've said this a few times about future videos, but I do plan on getting back into it in 2022. Another resolution is to hop back on this YouTube train because I missed it. Anyway, I will be doing another video in the future about the input learning method, but basically it's just explaining that through extensive reading and listening you're acquiring the language, and it's extremely beneficial to get your brain accustomed to the way the language works. So my absolute favorite app for this method, and the way that I've been learning for I don't know how long now. I just recently renewed my subscription for the next 2 years, and this is for the app called Link, L-I-N-G-Q. And if you're on this channel for a while now, you will have heard me say this before, but I will keep saying it until more people try this out because it's my favorite app. I have a playlist dedicated to the videos I'm going to be doing on this app. I'll link it in the description, and if you want to check it out, I'll also leave the link to the app in the description as well. Okay, so I just told you to read and listen as much as possible, but what are you going to read and what are you going to listen? And that's where I think I differ from most language learning classes in the way that I learn, is because I really want to learn from content that I'm really interested in. Yeah, so this comes back to the app that I really like, Link. And with this app, you can basically learn from exactly what you want to learn from and the content that you're interested in by searching for specific things. You can also import news articles and YouTube videos and Netflix shows into the app to learn from the content that you want. So this helps build motivation, and maybe not build motivation, but helps you keep motivation because you're not learning about stuff that you're bored with. And it also helps you improve your vocab and really specifically what you want to talk about, because it's the stuff that you're interested in type of vocab. And of course this can also be done outside of Link. You do not have to download this app. You can just search up yourself what you're interested in and learn from whatever content you find. This is just a very nice house for all of these different things that I'll be talking about. Okay, and tip number, what are we at? 13? 13, let's go with that. Tip number 13 is to talk to yourself. It sounds really silly, but trust me, it works wonders. Of course, you can't get any feedback on your speaking ability when you talk to yourself. That's a downfall, I suppose. But before speaking to natives, I think it's a really good way to get your confidence up, to get used to making the sounds of the language, and also to put yourself in the position in which you have to build some sentences without writing it down first. and it also helps you come across areas that you're lacking in. So for example, when I'm cycling to uni, I would be talking to myself about what I plan to do today, what I see on the street, anything like that. And if I notice something that I can't say, or that I don't really know the correct grammar structures, or I'm not sure if I'm saying this correct way, then I try to remember that, write it down as soon as possible, and look it then up later on in a study session. Speaking of getting used to making the sounds of the language, I really recommend something called shadowing. Shadowing? I think that's what it's called anyway. That's what I've been calling it. It basically just means to mimic and to imitate what you're hearing. So again, you can listen to stuff on Link or anywhere you want. If you want to pick one person that you really want to sound like in the language you're speaking, maybe just listen to them and try and repeat what they're saying exactly as they're saying it. And this helps you get used to the rhythm. It's really good for the rhythm of the language and the intonations of the language, and this will help you sound more native. And if you get these intonations correct and the rhythm of the language correct, you're going to be amazed at how much more comprehensible you become to the people you're speaking with. Speaking of the people you're speaking with, obviously you got to progress out of speaking just to yourself eventually. So you got to speak to some natives. And I know that's really scary, but it's very important. And obviously if you're living in the country where the language is spoken that you want to learn, this is going to be much easier for you to achieve theoretically. However, this is not really based for you at the moment. This is for people learning the language outside of the language in which the country, outside of the country in which the language is spoken. Maybe I should work on my English more. Okay, so if you do want to save some money and you have more time, I would really recommend some free apps such as HelloTalk or Tandem. And in these apps you can find language exchange partners, which I found my German language exchange partner from HelloTalk, and you can speak with native speakers that have similar interests to you, and you can talk to them at first, make sure you get along, and then have regular voice calls in which you exchange your languages. So half the time you speak the language you're trying to learn, and half the time you speak the language they're trying to learn. Going off from the same point, speaking to natives, if you maybe want to try a different method of doing this and you have more money, or you are more urgent to speed up your language process, then maybe an app or a service called italki would be for you. And in this service, or in this lesson, you pay tutors to have a conversation with you for the whole time in the language that you're trying to learn, and they give you feedback, correct your mistakes, they can encourage you along the way, even give you homework if that's something you ask for. You can also find tutors which have like lesson plans to help you go through a specific level in the language. Again, something I mentioned at the beginning, the A1 levels or the HSKs or the N whatever for Japanese. You can find tutors that will help you through this level. This is something that I did for German before I moved to Munich, and it was really beneficial. However, I won't be doing lessons as frequently as I did once before because I am a student and I don't have a lot of money. Speaking of which, if this is something that you're also struggling with, I do have a link in the description where you can get $10 of italki credit after you do your first lesson to give you a little boost and see if you really do enjoy it. I would recommend it if that's something that you can afford. Okay, we're coming to the end now, but these tips are still just as important as the ones prior, and this tip number 17 is to try and find some time to practice writing. So this is evidently and inherently easier if the language you're learning uses the same script as your native language. As I mentioned before, this is another really good way to identify areas in which your language ability is lacking and what you should focus on next time in your study session alone, or if you have a tutor from italki or another place. I don't know. So obviously the big thing about writing is to get it corrected. And if you have a language partner or a tutor from italki, then you can just ask them to correct it for you. However, a really good way to get some feedback on your writing is from other language learners and native speakers through the website journaly.com. This is another part of my New Year's resolution for language learning, is to write more in German, and I'm going to be using this website almost exclusively for this because I love it. I've made other videos on journaling before, but it's very simple. You upload what you've written, people can correct it, and then as a member of this community, then you should probably correct some other people's as a thank you. So you either kind of love or hate this next tip, and that is about grammar and learning grammar. And there is a debate whether you should even learn grammar in the first place. But in my opinion, solely relying on the input method that I mentioned earlier is not the most favorable way of learning a language. Well, at least it's not the fastest way, in my opinion. So I've been learning German for roughly 10 months, I think, at this point, and I've made significant progress just reading, listening, and speaking to people as much as possible. However, to take my language learning to the next level, I'm going to be now spending more time looking at the actual grammatic rules and sentence structures and syntax to take it to the more advanced level. Because even if it's your first language, and even if you want to learn like they did as children, learn as you did as a child a language, eventually you did go to school and learn all of these grammar rules anyway. So it is a really important part in this progression to become fluent. Okay, and number 19 is spare time is golden. And even if you can only spend 15 minutes a day actively studying the language, like actually writing or using LINK, for example, or anything, if you only have 15 minutes a day where you can sit down and dedicate to learning the language, that may not be the only 15 minutes that you can expose yourself to the language in that day. So what I mean by that is, what are you doing when you're cooking dinner, when you're going for a walk, when you're going to the gym, when you're cleaning the house, when you're having your breakfast? And could these times or these activities be spent while you're listening to a podcast in the language you're learning, or while you're listening to music in the language you're learning? Or can you create ways to be exposed to the language that you're learning in these activities throughout the day to boost your overall time with the language? And most of the time the answer will be yes. It is really not that hard. You just kind of have to get into the habit of doing it. But honestly, once you find stuff that you're interested in and you can watch some YouTube videos, then YouTube will recommend you more YouTube videos, and it makes it really, really, really easy to get regular exposure to the language you're learning. And coming in number 20 is to not be afraid about taking breaks in the language or making mistakes in the language. Language learning is really difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is very difficult, but it's also incredibly enjoyable and incredibly rewarding. So if you put a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect, it's okay to take breaks now and then. It's okay to make mistakes. Mistakes are how we learn and progress. It can be a little bit demotivating at times when you get something corrected which has a lot of mistakes in it, but they're just opportunities to learn, and it's way better to get your mistakes corrected and resolved than just carrying them on stubbornly throughout your language learning journey. If you need a break from language learning, then you should just take it. Take the day off, take the week off. It doesn't really matter, because you might be surprised at how much easier the whole thing is afterwards. Okay, and tip number 21 is really, really important, and that is to not compare the distance left, only the distance gained. It is very, very easy to compare ourselves to the ideal version of ourselves that can speak X language fluently. And when doing so, it can become increasingly overwhelming, and it can really be demotivating to compare ourselves from the position we're in now to an ideal position where we're fluently speaking the language. Instead, because that can seem quite far away, I encourage you to look backwards instead and look at the distance you've gained and all the stuff that you've achieved and progressed in the language before this. It is really going to make you feel so much better about learning the language when you see how far you've come. And if you remember step number 5, you can look back on the smaller goals you've made throughout the journey of learning this language and see how far you've come. And even step 3, you can go back to the old resources that you used to use and at that point seemed really difficult. Try them again, and then you'll notice that these are obviously going to be easier for you now that you've progressed in the language. Okay, so the very last tip, what is it? Tip number 22. honestly, I couldn't think of one. I couldn't think of the last one to really sum it up. So tip number 22 is to subscribe to this channel and stay up to date with the videos I produce, because hopefully following me along my journey learning languages and sharing in the things that I'm trying, things I'm learning, will maybe help you learn your own language and have a friend along the journey as well. So thanks so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoy the first video of mine in 2022. There's going to be loads more to come, and if you're watching this in the future, these tips are obviously still relevant. Yeah, so thanks a million guys, and until next time.